What happens when two powerhouse hosts go head-to-head on live television over a topic that cuts a little too deep? The tension in the studio was almost visible as Jeannie Mai sat across from Sherri Shepherd. Cameras rolling, audience buzzing with curiosity and excitement. What started as a light-hearted reunion quickly turned into one of the most awkward and emotionally charged moments in daytime TV history. Before we dive into how everything unraveled, make sure you hit that subscribe button and leave a comment below, letting me know whose side you're on in this situation, because by the end of this video, trust me, you'll definitely have an opinion. The interview began like any other. Sherri greeted Jeannie with open arms, the two embracing as the crowd cheered warmly. Their friendship had been public for years. Two women who'd carved out impressive careers in entertainment, both open about their personal ups and downs. Their bond seemed genuine, the type of connection that had survived storms and come out stronger. Sherri kicked things off with easy questions about Jeannie's new projects, her fashion ventures, and motherhood. Jeannie answered with her usual spark, full of laughter and animated gestures, keeping the audience engaged and entertained. Then the tone shifted. Sherri leaned forward slightly, her expression changing from friendly host to serious interviewer. Her voice softened, but there was an undercurrent of challenge. She brought up Jeannie's recent podcast comments about forgiveness and moving on after divorce. Everyone knew the topic was heavy. Jeannie's divorce had been a very public ordeal, full of speculation, accusations, and social media debates that dragged on for months. Sherri asked Jeannie to explain what she meant when she said some people use forgiveness as a tool to dodge accountability. The air in the room changed instantly. Jeannie's bright smile dimmed just a little as she took a deep breath, clearly thinking about how to phrase her response. She explained that, in her experience, there are people who demand forgiveness without acknowledging the harm they caused. People who want to skip the hard conversations, rush past the pain, and pretend everything's fine without actually doing the inner work. She spoke about emotional manipulation and how some people twist narratives to make themselves the victim. The audience went quiet, sensing that this was no longer just celebrity chit-chat. This was personal, raw, real. Sherri nodded along, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of disagreement. When she spoke, her voice carried a sharper edge. She said forgiveness for her was never about the other person. It was about freeing herself from the weight of resentment. She shared her own story, her own divorce, and said she forgave her ex-husband not because he earned it, but because she refused to stay trapped in bitterness. She said holding on to anger was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Jeannie's jaw tightened slightly. She replied that she wasn't talking about clinging to anger. She was talking about people who weaponize forgiveness to avoid facing consequences. She said sometimes forgiveness is used as a disguise for denial, a way to ignore deep wounds and call it being the bigger person. Her voice was calm but filled with conviction. She looked Sherri straight in the eye and said not everyone who asks for forgiveness deserves it, and that boundaries are just as sacred as grace. A few audience members clapped softly, unsure if they should. Sherri's expression grew more guarded. She leaned back, crossing her arms. Her tone became firmer. She said it sounded like Jeannie was still carrying pain, still giving her ex power over her emotions. Maybe, she suggested, Jeannie hadn't fully healed yet. The words landed like a slap. Jeannie blinked, momentarily speechless, then laughed. A short, incredulous laugh. She said it was interesting how Sherri had turned the conversation into an assessment of her healing, as if she knew Jeannie's private struggles. She reminded Sherri that she, too, had endured her own public pain, her own heartbreak. Why was it okay for Sherri to process her trauma her way, but not for Jeannie to do it differently? Sherri leaned forward again, voice rising. She said she wasn't attacking Jeannie. She was trying to help her see that she was stuck in her pain. She said she felt obligated as a friend to tell Jeannie the truth, even if it hurt. She claimed Jeannie was so focused on being right, so determined to be seen as the victim, that she couldn't see her own role in how things fell apart. The audience gasped softly. The atmosphere had shifted completely. Jeannie's posture changed. She sat up straighter, eyes blazing. She said Sherri had no right to assume anything about her marriage, her choices, or her healing. Just because Sherri's version of moving on meant forgiving and forgetting didn't mean that was the only path. She said taking the high road often meant letting people off the hook too easily, and she was done playing that role. Jeannie's voice grew stronger as she said she refused to live in a culture that tells women to be endlessly forgiving while men face no real accountability. Sherri's face tightened. She said Jeannie was turning it into a gender issue when it was really about emotional maturity. She said Jeannie was confusing accountability with victimhood, and that her anger, while valid, had become performative. More about being right than about healing. The word performative hit hard. Jeannie's hands trembled slightly as she gripped the chair. She said calling her anger performative was dismissive, even insulting. She said people always tell women to calm down, to stop being too emotional, as if passion and pain can't coexist with healing. She said maybe Sherri was uncomfortable with anger because she'd never fully allowed herself to feel it. Sherri's mouth fell open, eyes widening. She said Jeannie was crossing a line, making unfair personal attacks. She reminded her that she had invited her as a friend to give her space to share her story. And now Jeannie was using that platform to attack her. She said she didn't appreciate being psychoanalyzed on her own show, and maybe it was best if they ended the interview and cooled off. Jeannie stood abruptly. The audience gasped. A few even stood, sensing a dramatic turn. Jeannie said Sherri was right. This interview did need to end. She said she had expected an honest conversation between two women who had walked similar roads, not an ambush disguised as therapy. Sherri, still seated, told Jeannie to stop being dramatic and finish the conversation like an adult. Jeannie shook her head slowly. That exact tone, calling her dramatic, was why she was leaving. She said she'd spent too many years being told she was too much, that her emotions were overreactions. Not anymore. Looking at the audience, she said what they were witnessing wasn't a meltdown, it was a breakthrough. She was standing up for herself in real time. Sherri stood, her expression a mix of anger and disbelief. She said Jeannie was twisting the situation, playing to the cameras, making herself the hero. This was Sherri's show, her platform. She had every right to ask difficult questions. If Jeannie couldn't handle that, maybe she wasn't as healed as she claimed. Producers started moving nervously in the wings, unsure whether to cut to commercial. The tension was suffocating. Jeannie turned back and said there's a difference between asking tough questions and passing judgment under the guise of concern. She said Sherri wasn't trying to understand her. She was trying to correct her. Sherri threw her hands up, clearly frustrated. She said Jeannie was twisting everything and acting like a victim. She reminded her how supportive she'd been during the divorce, how she had defended Jeannie online, reached out privately, stood by her. She said she didn't deserve this public hostility. Jeannie's eyes filled slightly, but she blinked away the emotion. She said bringing up private conversations on live TV was a betrayal. Those moments were supposed to stay between friends. Now it felt like ammunition. She said she couldn't help but wonder if Sherri had been collecting her pain just to use it one day. The accusation hit hard. Sherri's voice dropped lower. She said Jeannie was projecting her trust issues, seeing betrayal where there wasn't any. She said Jeannie was so traumatized by her past that she was pushing away everyone who tried to help. She warned that if she kept doing that, she'd end up alone. Jeannie stepped back. Her expression hardened. She said pretending to care while gaslighting someone wasn't friendship. Real friends don't humiliate each other in public and call it tough love. Everything happening now only proved her point, why she had become so selective with who she trusted. The audience was silent now. A few people had their phones up, recording despite the no filming rule. Sherri seemed to realize how bad things looked on camera. She took a deep breath and said clearly both of them had strong emotions, and maybe they should talk privately later. But Jeannie wasn't letting it slide. She said Sherri made this public, brought up personal matters on live TV, and now had to deal with the fallout. She said Sherri wanted ratings, and she got them at the cost of their friendship. Sherri's face fell. She reached out a hand, voice trembling, saying they could still talk, still fix this. They could show people how grown women resolve conflict. Jeannie looked at the hand but didn't take it. She said mature women also know when to walk away, when a situation has turned toxic. Not every conflict needed to be resolved for an audience. She picked up her purse. Sherri's face stiffened. She said if Jeannie walked out now, she was pro,